Xue Tao, pearl parted from the palm, white as the moon, round, bright, translucent to the core. Its brilliance seems reflected from the crystal lunar keep. Just one fleck, now it's defiled, and no longer spends the nights held within his palm. Okay, so we continue with some poems by Xue Tao. The one we have just read is part of a group of 10, which are generally called the 10 Partings. Now, the general background story around this collection, this decade of poems, is that in some moment of her life, Xue Tao antagonized one of these patrons, whether it was Zhuan Chen or one of the military commissioners of the area of Shu. Remember, she worked in Chengdu as a government entertainer. So the story is that after having antagonized this patron, and the anecdote mostly goes like in a party, she threw some object and was aggressive towards one of the guests of her patron. As a consequence of this, she would have been exiled to some remote region in the west or northwest of Shu, or even beyond Shu in the area close to the Tibetan border. And while in this temporary exile from which she would be recalled, she composed these 10 poems. One way of reading these poems is as rather sycophantic, groveling apologies. And, they basically describe each of them 10 objects that are out of their proper place. Dog parted from her master, writing brush parted from the hand, horse parted from the stable, parrot parted from the cage, swallow parted from the nest, fish parted from the pond, falcon parted from the gauntlet, bamboo parted from the pavilion, mirror parted from its stand. This one in particular tells us about a pearl parted from the palm of the hand that used to hold it. Now, as I said, one possible reading, these poems are meant to be allegorical, an object, most of the time, not in all of the poems, but in some of the poems, a precious object, is away from its proper place. So, as I said, the most literal reading is, just an object that is out of place. The most direct metaphorical reading is as a lament in which the poetic persona assumes these roles of these objects that are out of their proper place. A more subtle reading, and literature and complex wordplay allows us to indulge in a further reading, especially in some of these poems, when the object that is out of place is a precious object, might be making an interpretation that is a little bit more, how could I say, slightly arrogant and slightly challenging. Yeah, so like in this poem, like you could read undertones of the pearl saying, well, since you've done this, now you no longer get to enjoy the company of this precious object which I myself am. So especially in poems like this one, in Pearl Parted from the Palm, or in the last one also Mirror Parted from its Stand, or in Falcon Parted from the Gauntlet, you'll get this slightly cocky attitude, which some readers have also interpreted like from an erotic and sexual point of view, like in Fish Parted from the Pond, because fish imagery is generally associated with sexual dalliance in a lot of classical Chinese poetry. So there's this titillating and tantalizing, slightly proud voice of the poetic persona saying, well, since you parted from me, you can no longer enjoy my company and the pleasures that are associated with it. So you could make those readings. But anyway, whatever you make of it, the meaning of the poem should be pretty straightforward. It's, as I say, an object out of place, a precious object in the case of the poem we've read, and the attendant sadness for the object if it's anthropomorphized, but also for the person who no longer enjoys the company of such a beautiful thing. In this particular instantiation, the object is a pearl. And pearls, they were like in current society. They were precious jewels, precious objects in Tang China, generally associated with the moon. They were like mini moons. That is why we have some moon imagery that's quite present in this short quatrain. Also, they're associated with women. So that's a very interesting extra layer of meaning on the poem. Let's take a look at the two couplets. The translator, which is Jan Larson, actually translated it into 4 short lines. Number 1, white as the moon, round, bright, translucent to the core. Its brilliance seems reflected from the crystal lunar keep. So, the object, as we mentioned before, is depicted as a mini moon. It's white, it's round, it's bright, it's translucent, and it seems to reflect the light of the moon. It says the crystal lunar keep. There's this idea that there's this palace in the moon where Chang'o lives. Curious image, also probably not accidental. Chang'e is a woman who lives alone in the moon, but there's a rabbit with her, but she went there abandoning her husband by drinking the elixir of immortality and floating up into the sky. So precious object, but something has harmed it. That's what the second couplet tells us. Just one fleck, now it's defiled, and no longer spends the nights held within his palm. So again, literal meaning, but here, as in some other poems of the series, one can imagine the poetic persona of Xue Tao having spent nights, not literally in the palm, but perhaps quite literally holding the palm, or in the company, or entertaining the ideal recipient of this poem. So, playful, bantering, self-exculpatory, self-mocking. It's a short but quite interesting and beautiful and well-crafted piece of art.